Hi, everyone. Welcome to this edition of Roar Lions Roar. I'm your host, Bill DeFilippo, and we have a special guest this week. We are not going to be doing our normal big preview for Penn State's game this week against Northwestern. Instead, we decided to go out, get one of our friends to join us for this episode of the pod. We got my buddy Ben Goren, formerly of the website Inside and You. Now, I would say a person who has... I would say currently a person who has very strong opinions about Northwestern football. Is that correct, Ben?
Yeah, Substack Freak works too. Just like guy who spends his time mad about what's happening in Evanston. Whatever works, Bill.
Well, listen, Ben is better at like conveying thoughts that are mad in a clear and concise and like a way that you could tell he's upset, but it's coming from a place of like, I care deeply about this thing, which is why a reason I wanted to have you on this episode of the pod, so you can give us a sense of what's going on with the 1-3 Northwestern Wildcats. Northwestern started this season with a win over Nebraska in Ireland. Since has played Duke, Southern Illinois, and Miami of Ohio. Don't need to talk about how those went, although we will talk about how those went. The Wildcats, 98th in SP+, 111th offensively, 75th defensively, 123rd on special teams. So, Ben, now that that's all out of the way, how you doing?
Other than football, it's okay. The fact that I have to expose myself to this every Saturday is it's taking its toll, Bill. I won't lie to you. It's ruined 3 consecutive weekends for me, which is just like the worst place to be as a fan. Just like, these 19-year-old strangers have affected my mental health. Like, exactly. That's cool. That's how you know things are really going good.
Well, fortunately, you have your NFL team, the Chicago Bears, which they have an Ohio State quarterback, a very good one.
Yeah.
I haven't watched a single snap. I don't think it's Justin Fields' fault. And then it's serious news. The Sixers had a good offseason.
Yeah. But they brought PJ Tucker in, and I have to easily my least favorite play. Even when things go well, Bill, they're going badly. That's my existence as a fan.
Well, let's talk about Northwestern football, because it was the thing that you and I talked about for a second before we came on the pod, Ben. It's that Northwestern has this nasty habit of like, it'll have a bad year or two. And then off of that second bad year, they'll start to build towards something. And you'll see a team that wins six games, but like it's because their cross-conference schedule is a little tougher. They win 7 games, pull off an upset over a Penn State, a Michigan State, Iowa, someone like that. Mm-hmm. And then they use those 3 years of building as a springboard towards, we win the Big Ten West this year. You look in their recent history, 2012, they finished 17th in the country. 2015, 23rd. 2017, 17th. 2018, 21st. And then 2010, they were the number 10 team in the country. But as you and I were talking about it, it just feels like maybe as the college football arms race becomes a lot more competitive, Northwestern is starting behind the 8 ball, and maybe this current stretch of struggling feels a bit different than some of the past ones under Pat Fitzgerald.
Yeah, I totally think so. The truth of of existence as one of college football's have-nots is that if things are going good and they start going 5% worse, it's really bad. Like, that's the margin that Northwestern was always on. And even in those years where they would win 10 games and earn the right to get their teeth kicked in by Ohio State in the Big Ten championship, there was always something vaguely fraudulent about it. They won every single 1-possession game for 3 consecutive years. Just stuff where it's like, wow, I guess Northwestern is just a really bunch of well-coached guys who can kind of finagle their way in here. And once things get just that marginal amount worse, it starts to feel really bleak. And there's stuff that Northwestern is doing now that it wasn't doing in 2018. Procedural penalties on special teams and a bunch of penalties, and they're really loose with the ball now. It seems like every skill position player has a fumbling problem, which doesn't feel like a Pat Fitzgerald team anymore. Mm-hmm. And if Northwestern's not that, if they're not just going to be perfectly executing and maximizing whatever skill they have out, it's a team that loses 9 games. And they did it last year. And it certainly feels like 3-9 would at this point almost be a success, where they put themselves so far behind the 8 ball right now. And I think that starts with the defensive coordinator leaving town. I think Mike Hankwitz packing up and going on to that defensive coordinator box in the sky is really, really laid a lot bare. And Northwestern just hasn't been able to fix it.
So, yeah, I mean, you mentioned Pat Fitzgerald and how his teams have a very specific they have a very specific thing about them. Like, they are going to be a more well-disciplined team than you. They're going to be a team that the first guy is going to tackle you, take you down. They're not going to be these little dumb penalties. Yes, they're going to run for exactly 4 yards per carry. They're going to throw for exactly 5 yards per attempt, but 4 plus 4 plus 4 is a first down. 5 plus 5 plus 5 is a first down. And just in watching them this year, they played a Nebraska team that was I think we can say they were going through it. And then they played these last couple of games, and I don't think any person can look them in the eyes and say that Northwestern is at a talent disadvantage against Southern Illinois or Miami of Ohio. Right. But it just feels like this is a team that those fundamentals, those basic things that you expect out of a Pat Fitzgerald football team just aren't there right now.
Yeah, for sure. And when we really get into it, I think there are position groups in Northwestern who were even outclassed against their matchup against SIU. There are some real talent deficits here, but it's not enough to lose those 3 games. It's not enough to lose to Blaine Gabbert's little brother's backup who threw for 60 yards. That was Miami. That shouldn't be happening. I mean, it's just a team that looks discombobulated a lot of the time on both sides of the ball. And the one game that they won was the one program who is permanently, completely discombobulated. And now they've gotten rid of Scott Frost, and hopefully things get better down there, or not. It'd be great if they stayed this bad. But it's, the Nebraska game that they won, there were these big busts, like Donnie Navarro, who's an Illinois transfer who caught 10 balls last year, had 2 touchdown catches and 100 yards. And, he's getting 60-yard plays on busted coverages. And it's oh, that's cool. And then all of a sudden that just stopped happening. Guys are running in the wrong places on defense, on offense, just getting these penalties that on an offense that really can't sustain it. Ryan Helinski throwing progressively more confusing interceptions. It's just a team that if you have to have a crazy talent advantage to win games playing like Northwestern's playing right now. And Northwestern is never going to have a crazy talent advantage, even against these kind of podunk teams that they've been playing.
Yeah, I'm now looking at the teams, just the stat breakdown for the game against Nebraska. I didn't realize Northwestern committed 8 penalties for 65 yards compared to 1 for 5 yards for Nebraska. And if there's one of the things that has defined kind of the Scott Frost era of Nebraska football, it was just a complete and utter lack of discipline all over the place. To what do you attribute? I know you mentioned part of it was the defensive coordinator, but to what do you kind of contribute the fact that the fact that we're seeing Northwestern make mistakes, have lapses, and not necessarily be the team that we expect them to be in those years where things are humming? And again, Pat Fitzgerald is able to gin up 9 wins out of nowhere.
Yeah. So I think there's probably a sober way to look at it and a little bit more fatalistic way to look at it. Okay. I don't think that Northwestern has the horses that it used to. And the 2020 team, which is really good, that was Patty Fisher's team and Peyton Ramsey's team. Peyton Ramsey, longtime starting quarterback in Indiana, had a noodle arm, but really knew what he was doing and was, a pretty good field marshal. Patty Fisher, if you want to really expose the difference between the NFL and college, look up his 40 time and how many accolades he pulled in college. But he was just a great leader, a guy who put his guys in the right position, put himself in the right position. And I'm not sure Northwestern has the guys on the field who can be that extension right now. Not to say that, they're not solid dudes. I have no doubt that Bryce Gallagher is a great locker room guy. Bryce Gallagher's not a good middle linebacker. Ryan Helinski's not a good quarterback. And when you don't have those guys on the field, that's probably the more sober way to think about what's happening. If you want to get fatalistic with it, maybe Fitz is a little bit too comfortable. It was a guy who's talking to the Green Bay Packers a couple years ago. He's extended to 2030 right now. Made a couple of coordinator hires that I think it's fair to say were a little bit confusing. Mike Bajakian's pretty much nothing before he came to Northwestern. He's certainly nothing in Evanston. Jim O'Neill was like the worst defensive coordinator in the history of the NFL, but has some weird hookup with Pat Fitzgerald, and Pat Fitzgerald brings him in. There are decisions made from an institutional level that feel a little bit like hubris, and it would make sense if an administration is making those kinds of decisions that perhaps they're a little bit more checked out. Perhaps they're resting on their laurels a little bit and don't have that just insane drive that I think Fitz had for a really long time. I'm not sure which one is more true.
Yeah, you have to assume that part of it is Fitz is in year 17 here. He's 47 years. He's about to turn 48 years old. He has, if he wants, another 2.5 decades of coaching in front of him. And like part of the thing that I wonder, this is something that I know you're going to mention at some point. Part of what I wonder is if Fitz is the kind of guy who he's now, as he's approaching, 20 years as the head coach of his alma mater, like he doesn't have to explain a single thing to a single person. He's, getting beers bought for him in Evanston for the rest of his life.
Yep.
Does he have a statue?
Not yet, actually.
Okay, he's probably getting a statue at some point, all these sorts of things. And I just wonder if he is looking at, if he's the kind of guy who looks at how college football is going, looks at the contract that Mel Tucker got, the promises for money that Mel Tucker got, the promises for all the stuff that James Franklin gets, that Ryan Day consistently gets, that all these teams that he has to compete with to win games. Like, we're not even going to talk about recruiting, because recruiting at Northwestern is always going to be, the uphill battle to end all uphill battles. Part of me just wonders if he looks at all that stuff and wonders, like, man, I don't know if I don't know. I feel like I could just kind of coast and I can kind of glide here. Because again, he doesn't need to prove anything to a single person. Can you just, for our listeners, can you talk about the kind of uphill battle that is always going to exist at Northwestern, especially in light of the news that got announced 2 hours ago?
Yeah. So Northwestern, in terms of all of the glittery stuff on the sides, Pat Fitzgerald has everything he could possibly want. He has a couple $100 million practice facility that is about 50 feet from the shores of Lake Michigan on Northwestern's campus.
It's gorgeous.
It's unbelievable. And that was part of the deal when Michigan was flirting with him back around that 2010 era, I think. There was pretty serious interest from Michigan, and he parlayed it into a host of support from the institution. Now, if you weren't on Twitter on Wednesday evening, or you don't have Northwestern people on your timeline, there's an $800 million football stadium that is apparently going to get built sometime before 2026, 2027 for Northwestern. Currently, Ryan Field is a dump. Apparently, it's going to become SoFi Stadium, but a quarter of the size. So there's a lot of that stuff on the margins that is done. And Pat Fitzgerald's contract, it's a private school, so you're never going to know the exact terms, the exact length, but it's something like through 2030, which was an extension I think he signed around the 2020 season. So he's basically got a 4-life contract. He's set as much as anyone can possibly be set. But the stuff that actually matters in terms of institutional support for winning football games, Northwestern doesn't have that. I don't know if Fitz wants them to have that, but it is certainly true that there is no program in the country that has tougher academic restrictions for its athletes than Northwestern. There's other stuff that's tricky in terms of how they get athletes to come in, whether it's from high school or from the portal, that Northwestern has to deal with. And those shackles are going to be there seemingly in perpetuity. Northwestern doesn't have a booster base. It's basically just Pat Ryan. It was his gift that let them build this $800 million football stadium that they're apparently going to make. So there isn't that drumbeat that you get at a actual Big Ten school of, hey, this is embarrassing. We're losing a lot. What if we got some good high school players to come play for us? That's not a thing at Northwestern. The people who give the money to make Northwestern go are totally cool with Northwestern going 3-9 as long as they do it the right way. Which, maybe it's lame, maybe it's boring, but that's how it works here in Evanston. And realistically, if Northwestern wants to fix what's happening, that's what's got to change. And I'm not sure how that changes. And for sure, Fitz is one of those guys who like believes in the old-fashioned things about college sports. Like, I think it really matters to him that his players graduate. Like, really matters to him that they have this like student experience, which sounds ridiculous, like anywhere outside of Evanston. But I do think like that actually does matter to Fitz. And I think it comes from a decent place, which is a larger discussion for a different time. But Northwestern's just going to battle that. They're going to be this extremely archaic program in terms of the actual skeletal structure of it. And because of that, these seasons are going to be more and more common as the rest of the Big Ten, grows up.
Yeah, I mean, Penn State's the success with honor school. It's the Paterno Grand Experiment School. Like, it's something that we very much empathize with, but also Paterno was doing that in an era before what, people are not going to like. I'm saying is college football is a professional sports league right now, for all intents and purposes. It has been a professional sports league for a long time, and it's fascinating watching the true believers in that navigate this. It's not a long list of guys. Fitz is number one on it. But while you were talking, something I meant to do before the pod, I went and I looked at Northwestern's recruiting class rankings dating back to 2017, so the last 6 years. If they have a redshirt freshman, a redshirt senior, or double redshirt senior on the roster, this is going to go back to them. But 2022, they were the number 54 class of the country. 2021, they were 52nd. Going back from there, 45th, 54th, 58th, 50th. I'm not going to pull this up because my assumption here is that that's just the worst in the Big Ten. And every once in a while, they will hit on, a guy like a Clayton Thorson, a guy like a Justin Jackson.
We're both in the same class. So a guy like that. When we were talking earlier about how like there are years where Northwestern pops, it's that classic like lower to middle tier team where you build it 4 years at a time. And if you hit on a rich class, that team is really freaking good. And that was that 2014 class that had Thorson, had Jackson, had Garrett Dickerson, who's a huge recruit and a great player. The best recruit in that class was Parker Westlaw, who's a safety whose hips like fell apart. But that built into what happened in 2018. And recruiting just straight up flat right now. For all of the fancy new things that they have, it's really not making a difference. They just hired their NIL guy like 2 weeks ago. That's someone who they should have hired about 2 years ago. And, what are you going to do? You're not going to get a kid who, wants to get compensated what he deserves if you don't have that structure. And Northwestern just straight up doesn't have that structure.
Right. And the one blue, elite guy Northwestern has recruited over the last couple of years, unsurprisingly, Peter Skoronsky, who is a freak of nature. We will talk about him in 1 second. But first, I got to thank the sponsor of this podcast. Ben, you ever hear of this Home Field Apparel?
Once or twice, man. I think it's only about 30% of my closet right now. So,
yes. Well, if that should probably just be the entire ad read right there, because nothing I say is going to do better. But of course, Home Field Apparel, sponsor of our podcast. If you're a college sports fan like myself and Ben, you know what they are. If you don't know what they are a premium apparel brand based out of Indianapolis, Indiana. They're from the heart of Big Ten country. They are going to be going through their own existential crisis, my guess, sooner rather than later, about the state of their football program. Neither here nor there. We love them nonetheless. Their shirts are comfortable. They're unique. The designs are awesome. They make you feel a little bit closer to your school. Like Ben mentioned 30% of his closet. I probably have 10, 15 things from Home Field Apparel. Over the weekend, after my paycheck hit this weekend, I purchased something from Home Field Apparel because I've just wanted another thing from them because it's been a minute since I've gotten something from them. Penn State has its own line of merch from Home Field Apparel. 15 pieces of apparel in the Penn State line, but there's so much more than just Penn State that you can get. If you are a new customer, head on over there, use the promo code ROAR Lions Roar, one word, all uppercase, to get 15% off of your first order. Again, promo code ROAR Lions Roar, one word, all uppercase, for 15% off of your first order. Thank you to Home Field Apparel for sponsoring this podcast. let's get back to talking about Northwestern. Instead of talking about the big picture stuff, let's talk about this Northwestern football team. And we'll start by talking, Ben, about them on the offensive side of the football. And my note here is essentially that they have Peter Skoronsky, who is a freak of nature on the offensive line. And then other than that, it's, you're basically hoping for stuff to work out. Is that a fair way of putting it?
So would it surprise you to hear that Northwestern has the leader in all of Division I football in scrimmage yards on its offense?
Is that Holinsky?
That's Ryan. That's Evan Hall. It's their running back.
Interesting.
He had 200 receiving yards against Duke.
Jesus.
So he's a true, no one would have any reason to think of Evan Hall as one of the best players in the Big Ten, but he's really, really solid. He's a great running back. He can be a home run hitter. Now he's playing out of the backfield, which is cool. Their second running back, Cam Porter, kind of got Wally pipped by Evan Hall last year. He was supposed to be the starter, blew out his knee in the fall or in the spring. Evan Hall ended up being the starter, had a great year last year in another terrible season for Northwestern. So you have Skoronsky, who will be a top 10 pick or whatever. You have Evan Hall and you have Cam Porter, and that truly is it. And also, they're having an easier time throwing than running it this year, which is bizarre. That shouldn't be true. The running backs are, I think, that two-headed monster in the backfield would be a great running back tandem at just about any school in the Big Ten. I'm not sure there would be any room other than maybe Michigan and Ohio State who wouldn't be improved by having those two running backs heading up what they're doing. But there's just not enough there. Your left tackle being the best player on the team doesn't always, or probably pretty rarely, means that your offense is going to be chugging. The rest of the offensive line isn't opening up holes. There's not enough creative stuff being done in terms of motion to create a numbers advantage in the run game. And the quarterback position is terrible. So because of that, the offense is pretty much a DOA. But it's not to say that, Evan Hall can't pop off an 80-yard touchdown run on Saturday. Wouldn't surprise me at all.
Yeah, team's quarterback is Ryan Holinsky, formerly of South Carolina. I actually did want to make it a point to mention that the fact that they are that good on the running the football, when they are able to get going on the ground, and we saw this in the Nebraska game, Hall and Porter just bowled over dudes in that game. Both of them do have, your concern with them is turnovers. It is fumbling the football. It's one thing that I've noticed watching Northwestern. They're not always great at protecting the football. Northwestern, give me a second. How many is that? Yes. They have lost 7 fumbles on the year, which is the most in college football, tied with Illinois, Temple, and Stanford. But I think you kind of get to a really good point of, if you want to map out what the path for Northwestern winning against Penn State is, it is basically you don't do what they've had to do the first couple of games, which is fall behind and make Ryan Holinsky throw. If Hall and Porter can grind out 4, 5, 6 yards on the ground, which with the offensive line in front of them, not guaranteed, there's actually a path for this offense to be effective here.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. And they're able to do it against a very bad Nebraska team. So yeah, if it's going to happen, that'll be how it happens. But Northwestern running the ball this year has been really bad. I stand by that Hall and Porter are great, but there's something 110th in run efficiency. I mean, it's been really bleak. And it's just because there's nowhere to run. And in terms of the ball security problems, Northwestern was getting its teeth kicked in by Duke and cut it to 8, driving the ball with less than a minute left to play. Evan Hull takes it down to the 1-yard line, fumbles it into the end zone. Northwestern loses. Last week, Malik Washington, who's the best receiver on the team, fumbled it twice, and Northwestern loses to Miami. It is a weird problem, and it's one of those very non-Fitz-like team problems that seems to be spreading in Evanston. But yeah, if Northwestern scores points in this game, it's because they ran the ball well enough to make it easy on their quarterback.
Yeah, and Bill Connolly has pointed out that efficiency in run defense has been an issue for Penn State. They're somewhere in the 90s nationally on that. I do want to ask just for posterity's sake, about the passing game? Do you think there's really much of a path for them to, not even against Penn State, do much of anything over the course of an entire football season?
So they've got a couple of tight ends who are okay. They've got a transfer, Gordon.
They're a Big Ten West team. They better have.
Yeah, you would hope. They've got this kid Lang, who's pretty good too. But Helinski can't throw outside the hashes. He's okay over the middle, and can throw some deep middle passes. But if you make him throw it to a guy on the outside, it's more likely to go into Northwestern's own end zone than Penn State's. So, Penn State actually has, athletes at corner and in the back end of their secondary. So, I'd take my chances one-on-one all day. It's not like the wide receivers are that good. And even if they are open, I'm not sure it's a given that Helinski hits them. There's truly nothing to be afraid of. Helinski, when you watch the beginning of the game, it would not surprise me if you hear the announcers talk about how Helinski has a big arm. And then you will watch him throw a ball outside the hashes, and you will be as confused as me as to why that's his rep. He just doesn't have a Big Ten quality arm, and it's exposed when he has to go outside.
So my hunch on this game, and this is a story that I have told before in this podcast, was last year I went to Penn State's game against Rutgers. I had my seat, I will call them lovely all 22 seats, overlooking the entire stadium behind one of the end zones. And Penn State in that game put 8 or 9 guys in the box on every play, put their cornerbacks on islands against Rutgers wide receivers, and said, we know the one thing that you can do is run the football. We are going to try and stop you from doing that. You are not, if you want to try and throw it on us, perfectly fine. Go ahead and throw it and see what happens. And Rutgers saw that, and their entire game plan was basically, we don't care. We're just going to run the ball anyway. They threw it 23 times with their starting quarterback. They ran it 32 times. My hunch is that we're going to see something similar this week because, like you mentioned, I do like Northwestern's running backs. I do think if you can basically get Skoronski throwing dudes around, you have an area where you can run. And, Helinski has put up numbers once or twice, not even once or twice this season, against Nebraska, 314 yards.
On how many attempts?
Against Duke, 38.
Yeah.
Against Duke, 435 on 60 attempts. He's averaging about 6.5 yards per attempt.
So that's the big one, is that Northwestern perhaps has been too willing to cave to the pressure to pass. So when teams do load up, Mike Bajakian's totally fine to start throwing passes. The issue is you're not actually going to throw it over the top because you don't have anyone to get over the top, and Helinski can't really hit him when you get there. So I do think that the right thing for Penn State to do is to load the box. And I think the response will be dink and dunk down the field from Northwestern. That doesn't work.
Yes, an interesting thing here. Northwestern is 7th nationally in passing attempts. They are 6th nationally in passing attempts per game. They are tied for 3rd nationally in completions, not completion percentage, and they are 100th in passer efficiency or passer rating. So they're very willing to throw the football.
Yeah, a lot of it's game flow, but they are certainly. There were times in the SIU game which it's so silly to have to break down tactically what happened against an FCS team. But for the first quarter of that game, it looked like Northwestern could just run a power run for 6 yards and go score a touchdown. They could do that every single time. And they just got bored with it and started throwing it. And then everything stopped working. So it's a weird hiccup that they're so willing to get into this. It's not air raidy. It's not even West Coast. It's just throwing a bunch of short passes and passes behind the line of scrimmage when, you have a supposed to be good offensive line and 2 really good running backs. So it's been a frustration, I think.
And then moving on to the other side of the football, it's the thing that you expect Northwestern to be good at through hell and high water, right? You expect Pat Fitzgerald to have a good defense. But so far this season, that hasn't necessarily been the case. Against Nebraska, allowed 28 points, against Duke, 31, against Southern Illinois, 31 against Miami of Ohio. Yeah, they allowed only 17 points and 217 yards, but like you should do that against Miami of Ohio. So what's been going on with this Northwestern team? I know this Northwestern defense. I know you mentioned a little bit earlier that in Jim O'Neill, they have a new defensive coordinator or a second-year defensive coordinator.
Second-year defensive coordinator. So we can start there. And I think like the really fatalistic read on the last couple of years of Northwestern football is that maybe when we look back on 2010 to 2020, when it's 2028, we'll realize that Mike Hankwitz is actually the coach of Northwestern. And Pat Fitzgerald was drafting off of maybe the best defensive coordinator Evanston, or maybe the conference has like ever seen. The way that team maximized what it had year after year of just strangling don't bend but don't break defense was incredible. It was on the margins, like I said earlier, and now with Jim O'Neill, the attention to detail isn't there, and the scheme isn't as good, and maybe that's why the defense now is mediocre to bad week in, week out. I do think Jim O'Neill's a bad coach. I think his history as a coach bears that out when you look at what he did. I think he was in Cleveland when they had that just horror show year on defense. That was his team. Cleveland Browns, like in the NFL. I think that he is bad.
If you would like, I will now go through and read the NFL teams for which he was the defensive coordinator.
Yeah, this will be fun.
The 2014-15 Cleveland Browns. The 2014 Cleveland Browns went, let me pull this up right here, 7-9. The 2015 Cleveland Browns went 3-13 and allowed second only to the Jacksonville Jaguars in the AFC, 432 points on the season. And then in 2016, he received the NFL's kiss of death, which was Chip Kelly going, "Hey, do you want to work for me?" That Niners team went 2-14 and allowed an NFL high 480 points.
Yeah, I mean, he sucks. Like he's not a good coach. But this puts me like on an island on the Northwestern sphere. I actually don't think he's the problem. The reason why Northwestern is really bad on defense is because they don't have very many good football players. There are players who are really good. Their defensive end, Eddie Barre, is awesome. I'm really impressed with Cam Mitchell, who's a corner. Coco Azuma should learn how to tackle without just jumping into people with his head, but he's a really fun safety. But the worst position group in the Big Ten is Northwestern's linebackers, like by a lot. It's really, truly not close. They're not fast, but at least they're small. It's like, what if Patty Fisher were 2 steps slower and also wasn't like the smartest linebacker in the country? And there's like 6 of them. Like they can't cover anything. They can't fit right on the run game. They're too slow to, even when they do the right thing, to actually get there in time. It's just a disaster at the middle level of the defense. And I don't think there's a way to scheme around it. And again, what is troubling is that this is a Pat Fitzgerald team. Like, what's a Pat Fitzgerald team if the linebacker play is bad? I mean, that's a dark question. Brendan Gallagher is supposed to be the guy. He's the middle linebacker on the team. He's just not impressive. I mean, he's just slow, and doesn't tackle great. And like, how do you avoid that? Like, there's truly nothing to do if the middle of your defense just doesn't exist. I mean, like, there's just no scheming your way out of it. And that's why, teams are able to choose what they want to do. For SIU, it was, hey, let's just throw it over the middle of the field, 7 to 15 yards downfield every single time, because there's no chance the linebackers can cover us. For Miami of Ohio, who had this really fast kind of scat back, it was, all right, let's run it to the outside because we're going to beat them to the corner every single time. So Penn State gets to pick how they want to score points because the linchpin of the defense just doesn't work.
And you mentioned that there are some players here that make, I don't want to say make you think the entire thing is going to fall into place. I mean, they're like we mentioned a little bit earlier, 17th in defensive SP plus. They are bottom half of the Big Ten in yards allowed per game. middle of the Big Ten in passing yards allowed per game, second to last in rushing yards allowed per game, third to last in points allowed per game. But who are the standouts on this defense? Like, who are the guys that if it's the third quarter of the game and Northwestern defense has held up better than people expect, you think are going to be the guys who make their imprint felt?
So up front, it'll be Adibare, who's a defensive end, who's good. He's an NFL player. That's kind of really the only NFL player they have up front. None of the linebackers are competent. And then at the back end, they're really dinged up. Like, a lot of guys didn't miss time. Azuma missed time in the SIU game. I think Mitchell might have been out against SIU too. AJ Hampton's been banged up. Those three guys are really good. Cam Mitchell's probably the best. Azuma's probably my favorite just because he's really violent, but he's hurt. He got hurt in the Miami game and limped off and didn't put any weight on. It wouldn't surprise me if he didn't play. Those three guys are good. It's the other spots that aren't. And if I were to guess, at least one of those three is not going to play. And if they do play, it's real possible that they're going to be banged up. So the back end, strictly due to just attrition, isn't super strong. But Adibare is the guy who can ruin some game plans for sure.
Yeah, I'm looking up what Pat Fitzgerald said after the game about he was asked Fitz on the this is from place inside NU. Fitz on the returns of Cam Mitchell and Coco Azuma. Like I assess the whole team, we lost. It's disappointing to say the least. It's just great to have those guys back. You can't put a price tag on that. They're great leaders. They're great players. They are great men. Doesn't seem like there is any indication, however, of when they're going to play.
Yeah.
Northwestern's
just like super tight-lipped about injuries. Azuma was back against Miami and like appeared to be somewhat seriously injured.
Yes, and that was the apologies. That was the context to which Fitzgerald said that quote.
Right.
But yes, Azuma did have to get helped off of the field.
Yeah, and I don't think Hampton's come back yet. So, but Northwestern is like very Harbaugh-esque in that, we'll know probably by like the second play of the game whether they're healthy. But until then, I think it's just going to be a big old question mark.
So let's go into. I'm going to ask you to be an optimist, and then I'm going to ask for your prediction.
That's all right.
And when I ask you to be an optimist, the question that I have is, in your estimation, how does Northwestern, which is walking into this game as a 25.5-point underdog, which ESPN's FPI gives a 3% chance of winning this game?
Love that.
How does Northwestern win this game? In the serious sense, and not like,
right. An asteroid hits the stadium.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So offensively, Hull gets loose twice. Like, they need 2 chunk plays in the run game, presumably from Hull. It'd be neat if there was a big play in the pass game from Malik Washington. I don't super expect that to happen. But yeah, offensively, it'll be one of those games where they score points and you look back, it's like they weren't that good. They didn't deserve 20 points in that game. But it's going to be because of chunk plays, probably a bust or 2. So that'll be how it gets done on one side of the ball. On the other side of the ball, the linebackers play their best game of the season. They're in the right places more often than they're not. Mitchell is healthy, gets his hand on a pass, and Adibare can kind of mess some things up in the run game. It's not going to surprise you to hear this from someone who's trying to break down Penn State from the outside, but it's going to be Sean Clifford is the guy who has to win the game for Penn State, and he can't do it. Like, that's from the outside, like that's probably how it's going to happen. If Penn State is chugging in the run game, it's just cooked. I really don't see there to be any opportunity there. And the way that Northwestern, I think, wants to move the ball should negate Joey Porter and what he can do to wreck game plans, just because they hopefully won't throw it on the outside all that often. So that's kind of the route. And that is as optimistic as I can get. Like, Penn State fucks up and like Northwestern is gifted a couple of touchdowns. I think even hoping for anything more than that is not a super productive use of anyone's brain space. Because Northwestern is just cooked. They're just going to be outgunned and outcoached, which is not something I like to say going against the James Franklin team. But behold, it's where I am. Fitz does have Franklin's number. Like, even going back to Vanderbilt, like, Fitz knows how to beat him. So I guess there's that. But, maybe Fitz is cooked too now, so who knows?
Yes. Oh, God, I forgot to pull this up. So we're going to have some really good podcasting where I look up.
That's what everyone comes here to see, is you looking down at your computer screen.
Yes. The recent matchups in this series, Penn State won in 2017. Northwestern won the 2 before that, 2014. That was a 29-6 win in Happy Valley. And then, of course, the disgusting game in 2015, 23-21, which, if I remember correctly, that was the game that where, like, the alarm bells really went off for me about that Penn State team.
Yeah.
Because at that point, Penn State entered that game 7-2. There were a couple games in there that weren't great. There was the loss to Temple. There was a loss to Ohio State. There was a really gross win over Army. But they had managed to take care of business against Buffalo, Rutgers, San Diego State, Army, Indiana, Maryland, and Illinois. And then they ended the season with a 2-point loss to Northwestern. If I remember correctly, Hackenberg caught a touchdown.
That sounds right.
Gino Lewis threw it.
That's like the old Northwestern, right? Like, and
right.
I think like the important thing for any opposing fan to recalibrate their head about watching Northwestern is that Northwestern isn't going to win games by making it, a triple overtime game that ends 13-10. Like, that's just not how it works anymore. They're not going to yuck up the game. If they're going to win, it's because they made big plays happen on either side of the ball.
Right.
It's just so different now. Because usually if you asked me that question a couple years ago, it'd be like, Northwestern scores a touchdown and wins with 7 points.
They have the ball for 40 minutes.
Yeah.
They force 3 turnovers. Like they're
Penn State misses
10 for 12
3
on
short field goals. Yeah.
Right.
That just ain't it. It's just not the way the team's built. It's supposed to be disruptive on either side of the ball. They're just not good enough to actually do it.
So let's get to your prediction here. Penn State, 25-point favorite, over under of 52. I have a feeling I know the direction in which you're going to take this, but where are you going to go here?
So if I only had one bet to give, it'd be the under. I really don't see 53 points in this game. Unless Penn State wants to get there on their own, that'd be cool. But regardless of whether or not Northwestern covers, Penn State will not ever be threatened in this game. It would not surprise me if it was one of those 31-14 games where I guess Northwestern covers and is just getting their heinies handed to them the whole game. But it'll be a very, very comfortable Penn State win. You'll probably end up having some misattributed optimism about what you can do on the peripheries of defenses because the outside linebackers for Northwestern are very, very slow. So, it'll be a cruise and a snooze. The under, I think, is the right way to go here.
It is a 3:30 p.m. kick in Happy Valley. I don't remember who the play is, but I know Dan Orlovsky is on this football game. Actually, you know what? I'm actually excited that Dan Orlovsky is on this football game because this is the first game that he will do since Jimmy Garoppolo ran out of the back of an end zone on Monday Night Football. And Dan Orlovsky got the greatest redemption that any human has ever had in their entire life. So
finally. I'm also excited that Orlovsky's on the call because he has to be unhappy and watch this game for 4 hours. So that's some cosmic justice, I think.
After spending all this time talking to Ben, I will give my bit of a prediction, which basically is, I think last week, Penn State did what Ben said Northwestern did against Southern Illinois, which was race out to a 14-0 lead. Look fantastic. Everything seems to be humming. Everything seems to be working. And then they just kind of fall asleep at the wheel a little bit. It's 14-14. They need to go out there, score right before the half. It's 21-14. I think Franklin has said some stuff this week about wanting to fold in younger guys, get them reps, get Drew Aller some reps at quarterback, that sort of thing. But I think he just has a little bit too much respect for Pat Fitzgerald to just say all right, we're going to score in the first 2 drives, and then we're going to put in Sean Clifford's redshirt freshman brother to go play wide receiver. I think William Clifford's going to be a nice player. Neither here nor like just the general point of like we're going to start going down the depth chart here. I think Penn State looked like a team last week that was coming off of an emotional win, a convincing win against Auburn, and I think this week before the bye is their last chance before a stretch of at Michigan, Minnesota, and Ohio State to make some sort of a statement, but more than anything, just not leave a bit of a sour taste in anyone's mouths with that extra week off because you were farting around for, a quarter and a half against a team that you should beat. So I don't think Penn State's going to cover. I don't think Penn State's going to hit the over on their own. I do think they cover that 25 and a half. I think something in the ballpark of like 38-10 makes a lot of
please kill me.
Makes sense here. I apologize, but don't worry, Ben. You're going to get your moment in the sun here in a moment. But I generally think that Penn State is approached last week's game a little bit wrong. A little too lackadaisical, a little too happy to take their foot off the gas, a little too happy to go, we're going to just play all these young guys, see what happens. I think they need to use this game as an opportunity to say, we're not putting in the young guys until this game is totally out of hand, and I hope they use it that way. And with all that boring stuff out of the way, it is time for the part of this podcast that I am most looking forward to, which is the final thing we're going to do before we leave, which is just me writing down Ben is allowed to slander any and every football program he wants. I will say no Northwestern. You have done plenty of that. But any football program in the Big Ten, in college football as a whole, just go
off a little bit. I mean, so
go ahead.
Like it has to start with Iowa because they're so funny to me. Like as
you are in friendly confines if you were going to make fun of the Iowa Hawkeyes.
Yeah, I mean, like as a team that has 2 joker coordinators and a head coach who wants to win every game 12-8, it's amazing that I can point at another program and be like, "Wow, you guys are just bleak. Like you guys are just a bunch of losers." Like the fact that Kirk Ferentz has his just absolute ridiculously dumb son running that offense, just getting worse every year is awesome. Like that's so funny. Like that Spencer Petras has regressed from where he was last year is like not possible. Like we've reestablished what absolute zero is. That Spencer Petras is now even worse as a college football quarterback. That's great. That Northwestern Iowa game this year should be played underground. It should be played in a bunker outside NORAD and just like kept away from the masses because it's going to be just apocalyptic. It's so bad.
Real quick before you keep going and you move on to the next program, whatever. Currently this year, Iowa 524 receiving yards as a team. 524 receiving yards, 48 receptions, 1 receiving touchdown. Former Iowa wide receiver Charlie Jones in Purdue's offense, 41 receptions for 533 yards and 7 touchdowns. I cannot imagine just how liberating it must feel to go from Iowa to Purdue as a wide receiver.
It is insane. So first of all, I thought Charlie Jones sucked. I thought that guy was bad. And nope, he's extremely sick.
It turns out it wasn't his fault. Yeah. It was not his fault at all.
He's just like really, really fast. He catches everything and he's a good returner. It's like, oh, I guess that kid is good. It's so fun that like you just lose that. It's like, Northwestern has had stuff like that where like Eku Leota like goes to Auburn as a good player and Brandon Joseph goes to Notre Dame. Bennett Skoranek now introduces himself on Sunday Night Football as a Notre Dame graduate, which kills my soul. But that is so much easier to take than watching Charlie Jones just double up your entire team's production. Right. That's so funny. Like, just absolutely brutal. Other teams that are worth mocking. Oklahoma fumbling their Big 12 bag to go chase SEC money and become like the 9th best program in their new conference. Very fun. Like, that program is no good anymore. Which is like, I don't know why they looked at what they had and decided they didn't want it. But that's very funny to me as well. And, I would be remiss if I didn't mention our soon to be brethren in the conference, USC. I think that USC is going to get the Nebraska treatment. Like they're going to come in and think like, all right, we're the team that gets to play Ohio State in the conference championship every year. And I don't think it will happen, which will be great. I think like Lincoln Riley having to go to play in Kinnick at night when it's 20 degrees outside. The first game that he loses in Big Ten West fashion is going to be just such a true delight to watch. And he deserves it for joining the Big Ten while he's in Los Angeles, which is a crime against God. So he will deserve everything that he gets for his team.
A thing I've tweeted about this in the past, but a thing that fascinates me about USC and UCLA, another just joker.
Oh God, just not
the fact that they get to call the Rose Bowl home is offensive to me. But how often will those teams have to play the blessed 11 a.m. local time kick in Evanston, and how often will like Big Ten teams have to play the 10 p.m. Eastern time kick out there? Like, I feel like I know the only thing that was thought through in all of this was get our money by like everybody involved. But I'm just fascinated in what it looks like the first time that, Indiana has a 10 p.m. kick, 10 p.m. local time kick in Los Angeles, or their bodies think it's 6 a.m. and they're on the field. Right. And they're on the field getting stretched out to play Maryland.
Yeah.
It's just, like very funny.
Yeah. So like, I think it's like obvious, like the funniest version of them coming out East is like playing Iowa at 11 in the morning. Like that's like clearly the funniest situation for Lincoln Riley to be in. I don't know what the funniest team to go out to Los Angeles is. Like, that's a good question. It's like, is it Maryland? I don't really think so, because like Maryland is vaguely coastal, so like it feels right that they'd be playing on the West Coast. Like, is it Purdue? It's probably like Wisconsin, right? Like,
well, what I was going to say, I think it might be one of the like Penn State, Ohio State, Michigan, Wisconsin group, if only because those are like the insane fan bases that travel super well, and that will basically be a home game for them in Los Angeles.
Yes. So in that case, it's probably Wisconsin. And also like Wisconsin, when they figure out their coaching situation, will like kick their ass. It'll be great. Like, and when Wisconsin beats you, it's very physical and emasculating, which is also great. Like, that'll be really fun to watch those guys deal with that for the first time. Lord knows I've experienced it enough, so I want to see them deal with it too.
All right, final chance. Speak now on any other programs or forever hold your peace.
Oh, well, I guess the entire Northeast, I mean, other than I guess you guys, should just be cut off, right? Like, I don't think they deserve to play football. Like, anyone who plays like the 13 original colonies, like, do they have college football anymore? I think they've lost the right to it. UConn,
UMass,
Boston College,
Syracuse, Boston College, UB.
Just don't deserve it at all.
Focus on basketball. You guys are
right.
That area is good at basketball.
Yeah, Northwestern lost to New Hampshire once. That was fun. When Chip Kelly was there in 2006. That's a little fun fact.
Was Ryan Day on his staff?
No, but Colin Kaepernick was the quarterback.
Oh, nobody's going to get that.
Yeah, we're bringing it way back. We're bringing it back to 2012 Twitter bets. We're getting real deep.
That's right.
It's 8 p.m. local. It's time to get crazy with it.
Well, now speaking of which, 8 p.m. local, I need to go walk my dog sometime soon. Ben, thank you very much for joining us. Tell the people where they can find your stuff.
You can find me at Kicknerios, KICKNYRGIOS on Twitter. And I also have the aforementioned Substack Freak, which is Love40 at Substack.com. So you can check me out there. And that's where I weep for about 1,300 words every week about what horrible tragedies befallen Northwestern.
Also, if you're a tennis fan, Ben is really good at writing about tennis. Like, actually very good at writing about tennis. So I highly recommend that. Thank you, Ben, for coming on, and thank you to all of you for listening to this edition of the podcast. As always, make sure you're subscribing wherever you go and get your podcast. Head to the link tree in our Twitter bio and leave us a 5-star review if it is a platform that allows you to do that. If you're in YouTube and you're in the comment section, make it the one nice place to talk to other people on YouTube. There is literally no other one. This one should be pretty nice. Thank you, everyone. Make sure you're following us on our Twitter account at RLR Blog. And yeah, thank you to Home Field Apparel one last time for sponsoring this edition of the podcast. If you are a first-time customer, promo code ROARLionsRoar, one word, all uppercase, for 15% off of your first order. One last time, thank you everyone for listening to this edition of the podcast. I'm Bill DeFilippo. Take care, everyone.